Hey everybody, Tatyana Sturm here with the Storck Team and Exit Realty Denver Tech Center. I have Shannon Holman with me with JSH Insurance. And in light of what's been going on here in our country in the last year, just with fires and natural disasters, we thought it would be a great idea to just go over some housekeeping items when it comes to your property insurance. A little bit about me. I reside here in Greenfield. I've been a resident here since 2004. I have two sons, Calvin and Daniel. Daniel's 19, Calvin's 14. He's going to be attending Grandview High School next year. And a lot of you have seen probably our information and our cars, and we do a lot of events here. We're the Storck Team. So if you have any real estate needs or have questions about your home's value or what improvements to make, please reach out to us. We've got your back covered on that. And Shannon, tell us a little bit about you. You're also a Greenfield resident as well.
I am. Hello, everybody. So Shannon Holtman, as Tatyana mentioned, my wife and I bought brand new in Greenfield back in 2002. So it's crazy how time flies, but we're original residents. We've got three kids that went through the school districts here at Rolling Hills, Falcon Creek, and two of them graduated from Grandview. Our youngest is a senior at Grandview now, plays basketball at Grandview. So that's a little bit on the personal side. I have been in the insurance industry, mostly property and casualty, for 30 years now. Started fresh out of college, owned a couple agencies, and been on the management side of things. The last 4 years, we own and operate JSH Insurance Solutions, as you mentioned, which is an insurance brokerage, which gives us the opportunity to work with several carriers across the board, and really, quite frankly, work more for our clients rather than a carrier specifically.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it because this is for our Greenfield residents, and we both know that there were two house fires in our neighborhood last year. So very devastating to what had happened. And of course, we know what's going on in California. We know what's happened with the hurricanes. So, and hail damage, right? We had this huge hailstorm here in Greenfield on June 9th. It hit, I think, pretty much every house in here, including ours. So what does the forecast for insurance, homeowners insurance, mostly for people here in Aurora, Colorado, what does that look like for 2025?
Yeah, great question. And really the homeowners market is what we would refer to as tightened up. And what I mean by that is you have carriers, and you probably heard in the news with some carriers that have left the market in California. You have some carriers in Colorado that stopped writing business. You've got some carriers that canceled policies, not many, most just stopped the flow of new business. And then a lot of them really tightened up their underwriting guidelines as far as what they deemed eligible or not eligible. So and you've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, rates, Colorado is one of the highest markets, unfortunately, from a rate increase standpoint. Your rates, everybody's noticed, it probably doubled in the last couple of years. So what does that look like going forward? I would say I think most of the carriers are getting ahead of it, and they've got plans in place. A lot of those plans, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, have to do with deductibles increasing for wind and hail, which helps, quite frankly, I guess, mitigate or transfer some risk back to the consumer. So that helps the insurance carrier, doesn't necessarily help the consumer with a higher deductible. But long story short, the rates are increasing. Carriers are getting, there's less choice in the market. So you got to be very cautious about making sure you compare rates, but also not necessarily jumping around from carrier to carrier. And I guess understanding your policy, which we'll talk a little bit about as well.
Okay. So I have to admit, I for several days in a row, I was, glued to my YouTube watching news on the fires in California and just interviews of people that lost their homes. And there were a couple things that I picked up on when I was watching these videos, but and I just wanted to get your take on it. Some tips that they had given. So one of them was making the recommendation of getting your own adjuster when you file a claim. So can you explain to me what that means and why somebody would want to do that?
Yeah, you betcha. And actually, what I would recommend is that's kind of getting your own adjuster is really probably a step 4 in the claims process.
Okay.
So first, obviously, if you have a claim, you want to file a claim with your carrier. You want to talk with your agent. That's assuming that you have an agent versus if you're going direct. That makes it a little bit more difficult because you don't have a direct contact. You don't have a specific relationship. But chat with your agent. And my advice also, before you turn in a claim, chat with your agent, because having claims on your record, it's a catch-22 because that's why we have insurance, but we need to be cautious about what claims we file. Back to my comments about the carriers tightening up underwriting guidelines. Anyways, forwarding to what you were saying is, in most cases, claims are going to get sent to adjusters. If you have a relationship with your agent can be a middleman and can be an advocate. They're not going to be the ones to, determine contract language or make settlements, but they certainly can be a liaison between the adjuster and you and your contractor. We do that all the time in our agency. If a claim goes smooth, and what I mean by going smooth is, things are timely, you're able to get into touch with the adjuster, adjusters are communicating, providing their information, your contractor is getting in touch with the adjuster, and they seem to be settling the claim fairly, and fairly would be in accordance to, what your contractor gives you from an opinion in damage. Then you probably don't need to hire your own adjuster or public adjuster, right? And honestly, in my 30 years, that's 90% of the claims. They go relatively smooth. The problem is the 10% that don't. And you will have, depending on carriers and all kinds of scenarios, bad adjusters, lazy adjusters, carriers that, maybe they're tightening up things from a claim standpoint, whatever it may be, right? There's a 10% factor in there. And that's when you want to lean on your agent. And I can tell some stories about some things that the agent can do. But long story short, if you're not getting anywhere with your agent, with the carrier, it seems like the carrier is not communicating. It seems like the carrier is shortchanging what the claim amount is, compared to what you feel is fair, your contractor feels is fair. That's when you have a right to hire a public adjuster and a third-party adjuster, and that individual can, quote unquote, fight and compromise and work with the insurance company on your behalf. And that's where that would come into play, what you heard on the news. And a lot of times that's when those carriers are being non-communicative, and those folks are not getting anywhere, or they're getting what they feel shortchanged. That's when the public adjuster comes into play. Okay.
And that's some good information to know. And it's possible with this tightening of what insurance companies just tightening up. Obviously, we know the business of insurance, right? It could possibly be something that we may see more happening in the future, where policyholders would have to maybe get their own adjuster to represent them during the claim process, potentially. So just potentially. Yeah. Now, the other thing that they had mentioned, and I want to touch on a couple points, is they had mentioned about actually getting a full certified copy of your insurance policy, and fully understanding what is covered in your insurance policy. And I can tell you that just based on how I feel when those packages come in the mail is, it seems like they come, they're 30 to 40 pages, you're going through the whole thing. And to be honest, for me, I just kind of like throw it in my filing cabinet and I never look at it. And then, it just keeps growing and growing and growing with the papers I get. So that's one thing I wanted to have you talk about. But the other thing too is when we're talking about getting, these copies of your insurance policy, truly understanding what your coverage is. The other thing that I think is important is when the renewal process happens, so once a year, right? The insurance company can or may make changes to your policy, and you may not be aware of that, especially granted, I'm at full fault of this, not looking at it and comparing it from the year before, right? So if you could talk about that and also make sure people are aware that at renewal time, things can change and what we should be looking for, here on, being living in Aurora, Colorado with the hail damage that we've had, what we should be looking for on those policies.
Yeah, no, great information, and kind of, I guess, taking it back, getting a copy of your policy. So everybody should have a copy of their policy because to your point, it's either mailed or it's electronically available, when you start your policy and then each renewal. And we're talking about the full policy. The problem is those policies are very difficult language to read. There's a lot of parts of the policy that add coverage, then remove coverage. It gets very difficult. So you want to ideally, nowadays you can use AI to help interpret a policy, or again, yeah. And of course, you got having a relationship with your agent to understand what's covered and probably more importantly what's not covered, right? And you're never going to get every little bullet point because those contracts are 60 pages long, but you can at least get the high level bullet points of, hey, what are the main things I need to be looking for? Back to your point, what are the main things that aren't covered, et cetera, et cetera. So getting a full copy of your policy, starting to understand it, is number one. Number two, back to your point, on your renewal, every year things can change. Coverages can change. Companies can add endorsements and change endorsements. The biggest thing to look for in Colorado is your wind hail deductible. Those, like I mentioned earlier when we talked about the forecast going forward, a lot of carriers are going to what they call a percentage deductible. And the most common is a 1%, and that's 1% of the value of your building coverage. So if you have $600,000, let's just call it $600,000 of replacement cost, and you have a 1% deductible for wind or hail, that's a $6,000 deductible. That is becoming more the norm. And again, that can change on renewal. And if you're not aware of it, then all of a sudden you might have a surprise when you have a claim, right? So that's probably the biggest thing to look for. A couple other things to look for that are important. Look at my notes here real quick. But hey, what is the building coverage amount? And do you feel, is that an adequate amount, or do you need to review that, right? With the way prices have increased and labor's increased and materials have increased, making sure you have the right coverage from a building replacement standpoint. That's one item. Making sure you have building code coverage. That's another item. The Lafayette Marshall fires, where you heard people that were underinsured. A lot of times it was the total building amount, but it was also in the building code amount. And then the next area is loss of use. It used to be where most policies would have 12 months of coverage for loss of use. You want to make sure you have 24 months in that area. Because again, nowadays, and think of those Marshall fires, homes are not getting rebuilt in 12 months. So if you only have 12 months of coverage and you're still in a hotel or a rental property, come month 13, you no longer have coverage, right? You're now paying rent and you're still paying mortgage, most likely.
Right.
Exactly. So those three are kind of the big ones, is understanding your wind hail deductible, your building coverage, your building ordinance coverage, your loss of use coverage. Looking at my notes. Yeah, those are the main big ones that you want to double check.
Okay. Okay. And I know you had mentioned a story here in Greenfield about somebody that was having some difficulty going through the claims process on their home. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing that and how you were able to help that family through the process and get what they needed through their insurance.
Yeah, you betcha. And this kind of goes back to my advocacy of I guess encouraging everyone to make sure that you have a good relationship with your agent and agency. There's all different ways to buy insurance these days, and it's easy when you buy it online or whatever. But if you don't have a good relationship with your agent, and then you do have a claim, that's where potentially things can go sideways because you don't have an advocate, you don't have someone that has years of experience or a macro level of understanding how claims should work, right? So having an agent is important in those scenarios. In this specific case that you mentioned, the carrier was providing for, and it was that June 9th hailstorm, providing for replacing the roof, and that was all great. But the carrier was coming up short on paint for the house, paint for garage doors, windows, and some other damages, right? That the insured had hired a contractor, the contractor had deemed damaged. And it kind of went back and forth where I was able to get the insurance company to send out 2 different inspectors, talk to a couple different supervisors. We got the claim reassigned to another. So it was a pain. It was, one of those, oh God, this is not going well. But through my advocacy, again, talking to different supervisors, getting the adjuster, myself, and contractor on the phone together to review estimates and review why are these estimates different, right? Let's look at this picture. Mr. Adjuster, what are you seeing? Mr. Contractor, what are you seeing? Why do we have a difference of opinion here? And just walking through that process, and we were able to get the claim paid out in a much more fair manner to the insured.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that got taken care of because it can be a very frustrating process, just even having to go through the claims process, even if everything is covered. And I've talked to a lot of neighbors, and it just feels like it takes forever sometimes to get some of this, claims through, get it approved. And then a lot of contractors and roofers are backed up, and now we're dealing with weather delays and stuff like that. So it's great to hear that you were able to help that family get everything taken care of. So good job.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions for Shannon on insurance, and even if you're not insured with Shannon, that's totally okay. If you have something that you want to bounce off of him or concern or want him to look at something on your policy, that's what he's here for. He's been an original owner here in Greenfield, and I know you want to help our neighbors and just make sure that you're getting your questions answered and you're being taken care of. So his information's on the Greenfield page. Feel free to reach out to him at any time. Of course, if you have questions about your home's value, feel free to reach out to myself at any time. But we look forward to continuing to serve you here in Greenfield. And anything else you'd like to say, Shannon, before we jump?
That sums it up pretty good. I will, one last thing. From a preparedness standpoint, I'm a big proponent of making sure everybody has a home inventory list. You can get them online or reach out to me, and I've got one that I can provide as well. And we can talk more about that at a later time. But thanks to everybody for your time.
All right. We'll see you later. Bye.